Chapter 1. The letter. It was a cold autumn evening when Emily Henderson received the letter. The sky, painted with the dim glow of the setting sun, cast long shadows over the quiet town of Riverton. Emily, a schoolteacher by trade, had lived a peaceful life in her little cottage, away from the hustle and bustle of the outside world. She had always preferred the company of books to that of people, but this letter, strange and unexpected, piqued her curiosity. It was an old-fashioned envelope, sealed with a crimson wax stamp that bore an unfamiliar crest. There was no return address, just her name written in elegant cursive script. She hesitated for a moment before tearing it open. Inside was a single sheet of parchment with a message written in the same careful handwriting. "Dear Miss Henderson, you are invited to Blackwood Manor. Your presence is urgently required. Sincerely, Alexander Blackwood." Emily furrowed her brow. Blackwood Manor had been abandoned for decades. It was a large Gothic mansion on the outskirts of town, shrouded in mystery and rumors. Some said it was haunted, while others claimed it was cursed. Regardless, no one had set foot in it for years. Why now, she wondered. And who was Alexander Blackwood? Her mind raced with questions, but a strange feeling of intrigue overpowered her fear. She decided to go, if only to satisfy her curiosity. Little did she know that this decision would change her life forever. Chapter 2. The arrival the next evening, Emily found herself walking along the path that led to Blackwood Manor. The wind howled through the trees, and the branches seemed to claw at the sky like bony fingers. The manor loomed ahead, its dark silhouette towering against the moonlit sky. As she approached, the massive iron gates creaked open on their own. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stepped inside. The once beautiful garden had turned into a tangled mess of overgrown vines and dead flowers. The mansion itself looked even more imposing, up close, its stone walls covered in ivy, and its tall windows dark and foreboding. She knocked on the heavy oak door, half expecting no answer. But to her surprise, the door creaked open, revealing a tall man dressed in a dark suit. His face was pale, and his sharp features were accentuated by the dim light of the hall. "Miss Henderson, I presume," he said, his voice smooth yet chilling. "Yes," she replied, her voice barely a whisper. "And you must be Mr. Blackwood?" "Indeed," he said, stepping aside to let her in. "Welcome to Blackwood Manor." The moment she crossed the threshold, a strange sensation washed over her. It was as though the air inside the manor was heavier, thicker somehow. There was an eerie silence, broken only by the distant ticking of a clock. The grand foyer was dimly lit by a single chandelier, casting flickering shadows on the walls. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. "Please follow me," Alexander said, leading her down a long corridor. The walls were lined with portraits of stern-looking men and women, their eyes seemingly following her as she passed by. They reached a large, dimly lit parlor. A fire crackled in the fireplace, casting a warm glow over the room. Emily sat in one of the armchairs, her hands trembling slightly. Alexander took a seat across from her, his dark eyes studying her intently. "Why am I here?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and curiosity. Alexander leaned forward, his expression unreadable. "You are here because Blackwood Manor has chosen you." Chapter 3. The key. Emily stared at him, bewildered. "Chosen me? For what?" Alexander remained silent for a moment, as though choosing his words carefully. "Blackwood Manor is not like other houses. It is alive, in a sense. It has been passed down through my family for generations, and with it, a terrible secret." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "What kind of secret?" He stood up and walked over to the fireplace, gazing into the flames. "There is something within this house, something dark and ancient. It has been sealed away for centuries, but the seal is weakening. If it breaks, the consequences will be catastrophic." Emily's heart raced. "And what does this have to do with me?" Alexander turned to face her, his expression grave. "You are the key. Only someone with your bloodline can strengthen the seal and keep the darkness at bay." "My bloodline," she echoed in disbelief. "I'm just a schoolteacher. How can I possibly be connected to this?" Alexander walked over to a nearby cabinet and pulled out an old, leather-bound book. He opened it to a page covered in strange symbols and handed it to her. "Your ancestors were part of a group that created the seal. You have the same power within you, even if you don't realize it." Emily looked at the book, her hands trembling. The symbols on the page seemed to shift and move, as though they were alive. "What do I have to do?" You must perform a ritual, Alexander said. But it is not without danger. The darkness will try to stop you, to lure you away. You must be strong. Emily's mind raced. None of this made sense, yet something deep within her told her it was true. She didn't know why, but she felt a strange connection to the house, as though it was calling to her. Will you help me? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Alexander nodded. I will do what I can, but in the end, it is up to you. Chapter 4. The shadows that night, Emily couldn't sleep. She lay in the large four-poster bed in one of the manor's guest rooms, staring up at the ceiling. The wind howled outside, and the branches of the trees scraped against the windows like fingernails on glass. Every creak and groan of the old house set her on edge. Suddenly, she heard a soft whisper, faint and distant. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but then it grew louder. She sat up, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispering seemed to be coming from the hallway. She got out. She got out of bed and opened the door. The hallway was dark, save for a flickering candle at the far end. The whispering continued, beckoning her forward. She took a step, then another until she was standing in front of a large mirror. The whispering stopped, and for a moment everything was silent. But then something moved in the reflection. Emily gasped and stepped back, her heart racing. In the mirror, she saw a shadowy figure standing behind her. It was tall and gaunt, its eyes glowing with an eerie light. She spun around, but the hallway was empty. When she looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. Chapter 5. The library the next morning. Emily told Alexander about what she had seen. It has already begun, he said, his expression grim. The darkness is trying to reach you. It will use your fears against you. Twist your perception of reality. You must remain vigilant. Emily nodded, though she couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled in her chest. Come, Alexander said. There is something I need to show you. He led her to the manor's library, a vast room filled with shelves upon shelves of ancient books. The air was thick with the smell of old paper and dust. In the center of the room stood a large ornate desk, upon which lay a stack of old, weathered scrolls. These are the original writings of the group that created the seal, Alexander explained. They detail the ritual that must be performed to strengthen it. Emily picked up one of the scrolls, her hands trembling slightly. The symbols on the parchment were similar to those in the book he had shown her the night before. As she read the ancient text, a sense of foreboding settled over her. Suddenly, the room grew colder, and the flickering candlelight seemed to dim. Emily looked up and saw that the shadows in the room had grown longer, darker. They seemed to be moving, creeping towards her like living creatures. Alexander, she whispered, her voice trembling. Something's wrong. Before he could respond, the shadows surged forward, enveloping the room in darkness. Chapter 6. The escape panic surged through Emily as the shadows closed in around her. She tried to move, but her limbs felt heavy, as though they were weighed down by an invisible force. The air grew thick, and she struggled to breathe. The whispering returned louder now, filling her mind with incoherent words. Emily. Alexander's voice broke through the darkness, and suddenly a bright light filled the room. The shadows recoiled, retreating into the corners. Emily gasped for breath, her heart racing. What? What was that? The darkness is getting stronger, Alexander said, his voice tense. We don't have much time. Chapter 7. The ritual. As the days passed, the atmosphere in Blackwood Manor grew increasingly oppressive. Emily could feel the darkness pressing in on her, watching her every move. The shadows seemed to follow her wherever she went, and the whispering never truly stopped. Finally,